We're interrupting your regular internet serving for this week of BSD Now. About picking a compiler for debuggability. We also cover how to port Rust applications to FreeBSD, what the point of Docker is on FreeBSD/Solaris, and we have another EuroBSDcon trip report, as well as a network manager control in OpenBSD in this week's episode of BSD Now. BSD Now, episode 223, compile once, debug twice, recorded on the 6th of December 2017. Hi, I'm your host, Benedikt Reuschling.
And I'm Alan Jude.
Yes, we're in the cold month of the year, at least in this part of the world, but that shouldn't stop us from getting into the headlines this week about compile once, debug twice, our show title this week. Picking a compiler for debuggability, part 1. This is over at backtrace.io.
So, so this is a company that makes a distributed crash reporting system to figure out what went wrong with your fleet of FreeBSD servers. And they do a lot of work on the debugger, and so they've written this nice article comparing the compiled binaries you get from GCC and Clang and seeing which one gives you better debugging when a binary you've shipped in production crashes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So this is an interesting look into why when you try to debug a crash, you can often find that all the useful information has been optimized out when when you run the debugger, and it's like, oh, there's the variable that tells me why it went wrong, and it just says optimized out. That's not very helpful.
Yeah.
So the article starts here. Have you ever had an assert get triggered in your code only to result in a useless core dump with missing variable information or an invalid call stack? Common factors that go into selecting a C or C++ compiler are availability, right? Does the compiler run on your platform? Correctness, does it actually make programs that work? Compilation speed and application performance. A factor that's often neglected is debug information quality, which symbolic debuggers use to reconcile application execution state to the source code in a form that is familiar to software engineers, right? So it allows you to figure out, what line in the source code caused the crash.
Or the line of
how you got to this state, like what functions got called and how you ended up where you are.
Yeah.
The backtrace, which lets you see, this function, then called this function, called this function, then called this one, and that's where we crashed.
Yeah, it's like a map. You are here.
Yeah. Yes. When production builds of an application fail, the level of access to program state directly impacts the ability of a software engineer to investigate and fix a bug. If a compiler has optimized out a variable or is unable to express to a symbolic debugger how to reconstruct the value of that variable, the engineer's investigation process is significantly impacted. Either the engineer has to attempt to recreate the problem on their own machine or something, iterate through a bunch of speculative fixes, and maybe it's this, maybe it's that, or attempt to perform prohibitively expensive debugging, such as reconstructing program state through executable code analysis, trying to do it all manually. So debug information quality is a fact not proportionally related to the quality of the generated executable code and varies wildly from compiler to compiler. So just because a certain compiler produces the best code doesn't mean it produces the best debugging. Although better produced code doesn't necessarily mean worse debuggability.
Yeah, that's not the
different compilers emit debug information at varying levels of quality and accuracy. However, certain optimizations will certainly impact any debugger's ability to generate accurate stack traces or exact variable values. So if we look at some of the examples here, so we see this program where it's just a main function that loads a pointer and then pauses and returns 0.
Easy enough. Yeah.
Yes. In the above program, the value of argv is extracted and then the program is paused. The ckprload ptr, which is one of the helper functions from concurrency kit, which is a tool developed by the person who wrote this article. The function performs a read from the region of memory pointed to by argv in a manner that prevents the compiler from performing an optimization on it. This ensures that the memory access occurs, and for that reason, the value of argv must be accessible at the time that you call the load pointer function. When compiled with GCC, the debugger fails to find the value of that variable. The compiler determines that the value of argv is no longer needed after we call the load pointer function, and so it doesn't bother paying the cost of saving that value anywhere. However, if we modify the program and put the pause instruction before the call to load pointer, the debugger is able to successfully extract the value, as you see in the output here. The executable code will also ensure that the value of argv is saved and restored. In this particular situation, when main is called, the value of argc is in the RSI register. The compiler will save the value of RSA to the RBX register, whose value pause would be required to restore prior to its return. And therefore it's getting set again, and so it's there.
Yeah, and you see that in the assembler code here listed.
Yeah. Some optimizations generate executable code whose call stack cannot be sufficiently disambiguated to reconcile a call stack that mirrors that of the source code. Two common culprits for this are tail call optimization and basic block commenting. So basic block commenting is interesting. So they have, examining this basic block of code here, they have a main function that calls f, a function called f, on the result of turning argv1 into a number. And we see in f, if x equals 1, we call a function with the variable, the static string a, and if x is 2, we call function with the string b. And then in the function, we read that pointer, pause, and return. If the program receives a first argument of 1, then function is called with a and otherwise b, like we said. However, when we compile it with Clang, the stack traces in both cases are identical. Clang informs the debugger that function f was invoked function b, whether x was 1 or 2, which isn't actually what happened.
Yeah, different order or different.
Yeah, with common block elimination, the compiler may combine the branches in that lead into function into a single instruction, which means the stack is unwound to the same instruction in both cases, which makes it think that it's the case where you call it with the string b instead of the string a. And then tail call optimization. If the last operation executed in the function is a call to another function, the compiler may have the executable code jump into the target function without allocating additional stack space. In certain situations, this means that the debugger will not have sufficient information to unwind the function call stack, and it won't know that you're actually calling this other function. And so when you get the stack trace, it's like, how do we end up in this code over here if we never call that function? And it goes on about that. And it says, though some optimizations will certainly impact the accuracy of a symbolic debugger, some compilers simply lack the ability to generate debug information in the presence of certain optimizations. One common optimization is induction variable elimination, a variable that's incremented or decremented by a constant on every iteration of a loop or derived from some other variable that follows this pattern is an induction variable.
Like in the for loop?
Yeah, so here you can see they have a for loop where they go from 0 until I is, or while I is less than n, and then increment by 1 each time. And then they're checking, loop through this buffer and count how many times the letter W appears.
And sum it up, yeah.
Yeah. So sum is plus equal to whether or not the current letter in the buffer is W. So it'll keep adding 0 or 1 depending on whether it's a W or not. So when they call this function, on a buffer and give it 4 kilobytes, we see that the code that's generated is actually different. So coupled with other optimizations, the compiler is then able to generate code that doesn't actually rely on a dedicated counter variable, I, for maintaining the current offset into buffer. An approximate semantic mapping of the source code to the generated code looks different. As you can see, I is completely optimized out. The compiler determines it doesn't have to pay the cost of maintaining the induction variable I. It maintains the pointer in the register RDI. The code is effectively rewritten to something closer to, while buffer is not the end of the buffer. So it turns buffer into a pointer and sets the end of it to be the X bytes after the start. And it just does a while loop until the current pointer is matching the end of it. And basically it changes the for loop into a while loop until it's the end of the string. And there it doesn't end up needing to have this separate I variable.
Okay.
So it says both GCC and Clang will end up generating similar executable code for this program. Debug information must support aggressive compiler optimizations, and for that reason is highly expressive. For example, if we look at the debug information generated by GCC using the dwarf dump tool, we can see what output it had. And you can see this last line here. The highlighted line indicates how to interpret the current state of registers to extract the value of the variable I, when the instruction pointer is pointed towards memory address 4008CC through 4008CE. The highlighted line below is the instruction at that address, which you can see is the add instruction. So the debug information in the dwarf format expressing the value of I using a state machine. The highlighted debug information in the first screenshot expresses that the debugger should push the value into the RDI register and then onto the stack, and the value of the RDX register, subtract the two, then add the value to 4095, because we set the buffer as 4096 bytes, to find the value of I. Note that the debug information does not describe the value of I in all regions of executable code where it is live, meaning a debugger would be unable to retrieve that value. Clang, on the other hand, is unable to express this, and for some variables may simply provide invalid information rather than indicating that the value is optimized out. So you can see in some example output here, Clang 3.6 actually shows a value that's not right, rather than saying it doesn't know what the value is, which can make your debugging even more confusing, right? It's like, how did it possibly get to this value? That doesn't make any sense. It's like, well, actually, the debugger just messed up there. The value of that was never actually that value. So they say in this particular example, GCC 5.2 is able to recover the value of I depending on the instruction being executed by the program at the time the debugger attempts to extract the value. Clang, on the other hand, has erroneous debug information and expresses values for both the sum and I variables as a constant value of 0. Beyond optimizations, Clang is unable to express certain data types with optimizations turned on, such as bit fields. The more exhaustive comparison between the two, the compilers will come in part 2 and 3.
Okay, these are upcoming blog posts then?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It says, we've shown some common optimizations that may get in the way of the debuggability of your application and demonstrated a disparity in debug information quality across 2 popular compilers. In the next blog post of this series, we will examine how GCC and Clang stack up with regards to debug information quality across a myriad of synthetic applications and real-world applications. If you're interested in better debugging capabilities in your application, including C++ crash reporting and native crash reporting, then check out the products from their company, backtrace.io.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember they had a little booth at BSDCon this year.
Yep. There's also a lot of links inside this article, linking to more information about like the dwarf debug symbol specification and how it works and stuff. So if you want to learn more about debugging, this is a great place to start because it provides links to a bunch of resources and has a bunch of example output to kind of show you how you're getting there.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And our next story is how you can port your Rust application to FreeBSD. This is over at medium.com. And it starts with a nice introductory part about the FreeBSD ports collection. So this is a post by Andrew Cherkashin, I guess. Yeah, that's correct. So the FreeBSD ports collection, he writes, is the way almost everyone installs applications or ports on FreeBSD. Like everything else about FreeBSD, it is primarily a volunteer effort. It is important to keep this in mind when reading this document. So in FreeBSD, anyone may submit a new port or volunteer to maintain an existing one that is currently unmaintained. No special commit privileges is needed, so you can just say, I want to maintain this port, and they basically let you. For this guide, he will use the FD tool written by David Peter as an example project to keep it simple and understandable. I mean, there are bigger ports that are more complex, but this keeps it nice and small. So the prerequisites are basically a FreeBSD installation, or a virtual machine is totally fine. It doesn't have to be a bare metal installation. A local ports tree that is done via a subversion, so you pull down the development version of the ports tree basically. And then portlint, which is also located within the ports tree at devel/portlint, and poudriere, which is also located in the ports tree at ports-management/poudriere. This is optional, but it helps a bunch if you're testing different options in ports and things like that. So getting the ports tree is easy. When you install FreeBSD, you can opt out of the ports tree in the installer, and you can basically get the newer version, because by the time the ISOs are prepared or the install media, the ports tree on that is outdated by then, because it's continually updated. So you install Subversion, which is quite easy using package. So you do package install svn, and then you check out the svn version of the ports tree, which is located at svn.freebsd.org/port/head. So you get the latest and last version of the ports development, and you, in this case, check this out into /user ports. So you basically overwrite your local ports tree with that. You can also, of course, check this into a different directory if you don't want to keep overwriting your current ports tree, if you want to keep them separate. But that's totally working. So poudriere itself, sometimes
I think poudriere will cover more later, so we'll just
we skipped ahead a little bit. Okay. Yeah. So then the big thing is, how does this ports tree work? So all this thing is done using makefiles. So whole porting process in most cases is writing one makefile that actually describes how this port should be built and installed correctly in the system. He recommends doing something like this. So here's a little example. That this is the one he wrote for FD. So it has a couple of variables that are required to fit into the port's infrastructure, like port name.
Right. Yeah, so you set what the name of the port is and what the version is. Then there's a special variable here, dist version prefix, which just the ports tree can automatically guess the file name of the tarball you're going to download to build this, based on the fact that almost all programs are name-version number.tar or whatever. And in this case, they put a V in front of the version number, so we have that variable. You specify what categories it goes in, and then a package name suffix is if you're going to have multiple versions of a specific port or something like that, you can have different suffixes to make them different. Then there's the license file, so that users can know which licenses the program they're going to install uses. In this case, it's dual licensed under MIT and Apache 2.0. Then the uses flag specifies certain major dependencies. Like in this case, it requires cargo to build it, so it'll install that as a dependency. If the code you're using is coming from GitHub, then you can just say use GitHub and give it the account name. And that's all you have to provide. Although if for one reason or another the name of the repo on GitHub is not the same as the name of the program, then you also specify that. And then conflicts allows you to, if there are multiple different versions of this, you can make so that, you can't install FD 7 and 8 at the same time or whatever.
Yep. So this is what basically most ports have, more or less. Some ports are smaller, others are much bigger. And this is what they provide so that people can easily type make install or make config. And the port knows what it's...
This one's actually a slightly complicated example in that it includes a bunch of like shell completions and stuff, which is not something you'd normally have extra. But it shows how that's just a matter of hooking up to the existing framework that's already in place.
Yep. So then, then you basically continue with header parts. So you use your portlint. Because the order of items in the makefile is important, so portlint-AC will help you get it right. So it will tell you what's wrong there and which things you need to either add or reorder within that makefile. And there's a lot of inspiration in other ports, you can basically look at their makefiles and extract all the information you need and get this as an example and see, this is how it's supposed to look like, because every other port has it in this specific order. So the header is just one line. It has the subversion string, $FreeBSD $. So this will get expanded once it's committed to subversion. And then there's the port metadata. So because ports are, how many do we have now? 30,000?
Pretty close to 30,000.
Yeah. So to keep this ordered and know where certain ports reside, they have a primary category. In case of the FD utility is sysutils, and therefore it's easily located under user ports sysutil/FD, so that people can find it and also can say make search in a certain category and get listed those categories in that specific area. So since this ports conflicts with other utilities or with another utility called FD, so there's a name clash here, he specified the package suffix as package name suffix -find so that you can figure out which one is which. And then there's a conflicts_install variable that you can set so that the ports framework, if you already have one of the two installed and you can install the second one, then it will say, this ports conflict with the other one. Either deinstall the other one you already installed or find some other port that does the same or something else. So that means to install it from packages, a user will have to type package install fd-find and not just fd, because fd would give you a different port. Licenses, Alan mentioned this already.
Yeah, we already kind of talked about that.
Dist files, we had this. So this is pretty much a straightforward guide to getting a port running.
Yeah, so if you're not using GitHub with dist files, you would basically specify the URL where to get the tarball from to build the source. But if it's GitHub, you could just provide the username, and sometimes you need to provide like the repo and branch, but usually the defaults are what you want.
Yep. And then there's a bonus round about patching source code. So he writes, sometimes you have to patch it and send the patch upstream. Merging it upstream can take a while, so you can patch it as a part of the install process. So this is a local patch needed on that specific operating system or that specific architecture maybe. This might be something that only you need on this specific operating system. An easy way to do this is you go to the work directory, copy the file you want.
They missed a step. So in the port, you'd have to run make extract so that it downloads the tarball and extracts it and creates the work directory.
Yeah, otherwise there's nothing to work with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you do make extract, then you go to the work directory, which actually makes this work directory appear, and then you copy the file you want to patch and add a .orig for original suffix to it so that people can discern what it's...
so you make a copy of the original version, and then you edit the regular named version, make whatever changes you need to make it work on FreeBSD, and then you go back to the ports directory, like port/category/name, and run make patch, and it will look for all the .orig files, diff them against the version you changed, and create the patch files for you.
Yeah, so that makes it easy to create patches if you don't know what what a diff utility does and all specific things. This make patch does it for you.
Because there's a certain way of naming the patches and so on, so that when you run make install, it can extract it, apply the patches, configure it, and build it. If having just a bunch of patches in a directory isn't as helpful as having the patches have the specific names that allow the ports tree to figure out which file to apply the patch to and so on.
Yeah. So the ports people put a lot of effort into making it easy for people maintaining the ports to do the whole patching cycle and submitting those ports without knowing
pretty
too
much all of the complicated stuff is extracted into the ports framework, so that you just have to say which of these various techniques you need to apply to this port to make it install. In general, open source software, at least for a long time, was built to be pretty portable. It was, you provide the basic POSIX interfaces and the programs just work. And that's how we've managed to have 30,000 programs that all just compile on FreeBSD with no or very minimal modification.
Mm. And then once you did that, it's time for submitting the port. First, you make sure that portland-AC doesn't give you any errors or warnings, because otherwise they will just reject your patch and ask you to run this first. Second, make sure that putRare can build it on both AMD 64 and i386 architectures, so that both get the same port working. And if it can't, you have to either fix it or mark the port broken for that specific arch. So maybe something doesn't work on i386, but it's a 64-bit program and doesn't or work perfectly on AMD 64. So you need to let the port know that this is not working on i386, or vice versa. Could be both. So there are a couple of steps linked in the Medium post to get around this into the Porter's Handbook that has a lot of instructions how to do this. And if you have any issues, you can always ask your question on FreeBSD-ports and Freenode, where there's a couple of people hanging out helping you with these beginner questions or more advanced questions as well. So there's always a couple of people around you can ask. And there you can find your answer, hopefully, and also find more information in the Porter's Handbook itself. And
pretty much all the variable lines that you have put in your makefile are documented in the Porter's Handbook with some examples. They spend, I know Mathieu and a bunch of other people spend a lot of effort keeping that Porter's Handbook up to date. Partly so that when you build a new port, if you follow the instructions in the handbook, it's right. Whereas if you copy some random existing port, you might be copy and pasting the old way of doing something that they're trying to get rid of or whatever. But in general, creating ports is actually not that difficult. I've even done 5 or 6 of them over the years. And it's a great way to get started. I know I can think of at least 25 people who got started in FreeBSD just by working on a couple of ports and then got sucked into doing a lot more than just that.
Mm. Yeah, and they slowly get into more programming, and then they get punished with a source commit bit. So yeah, it's a good entry point into a project.
Well, and there's plenty of other ways to contribute to FreeBSD other than writing code, and whether it's just making ports or testing things or working on the forums or whatever. But it's a great way to get started, and usually the best way to get started in open source is scratch your own itch, right? If there's some program you want to use and there's not an automatically built package of it, then make the port. And a couple of days later, you'll be able to package install foo, and it will just show up.
Mm-hmm. And then you go, oh, this port over there hasn't been updated in a while. Let me take maintainership of that. And oh, there's another port. Oh, another one.
Yes. My favorite editor was at version 6 in the ports tree, and now I have version 10 out. And so I had to hack on the port and get it working.
Yeah, and a lot of people appreciate you updating ports and keeping it up to date. I mean, people always want to run the latest version of, I don't know, Firefox or other browsers. Those people are in high demand.
The team that maintains Firefox is got an especially fun job, but I don't know. Special shout out to Joseph Monroe, who's been my go-to person for, hey, I need a port of this. And a day or two later, it's like, there's a port of that now. I'm like, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That hopefully gave you some insight into how ports work and how you can get started. And, we should mention our sponsor for this week, which is DigitalOcean. Go over to digitalocean.com and check out what they have in terms of cloud computing resources, virtual machines in specifics. So you get these little droplets. You can start them within... last time I saw how long it took to start my droplet. It wasn't even 55 seconds. It was 28 seconds or 30 seconds around that. So this is super fast. And they have a bunch of sizing options. So you can have a very small droplet or a very big one.
Yeah. And I'm still very fond of this new medium size they have. The $15 a month instance. For $10 you get 1 gig of RAM, and for $20 you get 2 gigs of RAM. But for $15 you can get 3 gigs of RAM. You don't get quite as much storage, but you probably don't need it. And if you actually need quite a bit of storage, their separate block storage option lets you pay exactly per gigabyte and expand it over time as you need, which is a better option anyway. But 3 gigs of RAM is about as much as you're probably going to need, even doing pretty heavy stuff. And it just gives you that much more breathing room for, say, ZFS on a small VM.
Yeah, because it's all SSD storage, super fast. It sometimes wonders me where the actual performance is coming from, because some of these virtual machines are faster than my actual physical machines. So there's some beefy infrastructure there.
Yep. And with the hourly option, if you don't need it for a long time, you don't have to have it for a long time. I've spun up 40 DigitalOcean droplets for 1 weekend only and then got rid of them.
Yeah, especially if you want to try out something, you don't know whether you want to run this software or just want to check it out, how it works. And then you say, yeah, it's good, but I like the other one better. Then you just delete the droplet or close the whole thing, and then it's off and it doesn't need any more resources and doesn't count towards your account.
Yeah, so I got quite the spectrum. I have a couple of droplets that have been up for like 3 years straight. And a couple of droplets that get deleted after a couple hours.
Yeah, so this is exactly what cloud computing is about.
It's always nice to have a nice clean machine to do your testing on. And a machine that, if you mess it up, you can just delete it or whatever. Plus, with their snapshots, you can always, make another version out of the snapshot. So you can easily undo things that way, too.
And if you have a lot of these droplets, then you should still find it easy to keep the overview, because they have a nice interface in the web that will list all your droplets and, the CPU usage of each of them, and get a better view.
And they have a very nice Go-based command line tool, doctl. We really like their web interface, and we use it for everything, but trying to delete 40 droplets is a lot of clicking.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas if you use the command line one and just do doctl compute list, get a list of all your droplets, and then destroy name, and then poof, they're all gone. A lot faster than clicking. But you can do all the stuff from the command line as well. So very nice web interface. So it's easy enough to do without having to build your own tools, unlike some other cloud providers. But all the command line tools are there. So if you want to automate stuff or like automatically create additional machines when your website's busy or something, easy to do.
Yeah. Or they also give you a nice convenient way of accessing the console in case the network didn't work or you misconfigured it. You don't need to have any crazy Java applets or some other crazy installed. It's just a nice one.
You can use that console access to install NetBSD or OpenBSD or Dragonfly BSD on your droplets as well. They don't provide pre-built images for those, but if that's what you want, you can do it because you have access to the console. And we've covered guides on how to do it before in the show. So if you just search the older show notes, you can find those if you want to run OpenBSD on your droplet.
That's pretty straightforward there. Yeah, so check out DigitalOcean and use our coupon code FreeBSD Now, which will give you a $10 credit. Is it $10? Yeah.
Yep.
And then you can start experimenting with them and check out a couple of those droplets and let it run for a while.
So next up, we have a recap of EuroBSDcon 2017 from Deb Goodkin at the FreeBSD Foundation.
Oh yes, very a very successful conference, draws a lot of interest, and also people want to let other people know what cool experience this has been.
Yes, so EuroBSDcon was one of the largest BSD-related conferences, and it's held in a different European country every year, which makes it quite fun to attend because you get to travel to lots of different places. And it's slightly interesting in that it's basically organized by local people each year, and because it moves, that means different people. Although they do now have the umbrella EuroBSDcon Foundation, which helps provide continuity and resources and financial support, like having bank accounts already set up and so on, so that each conference doesn't have to redo all that work every year. But it's a good place. This year, it was held in Paris, and the FreeBSD Foundation was proud to be a silver sponsor of the conference, and many team members attended and participated in the conference.
Yeah. So Deb writes, the location was wonderful, and she loved sneaking out and exploring the city when she could. That's where she went. So from what she heard, it was the largest BSD conference in history with over 320 attendees. Yep, that is pretty much confirmed by now. So each venue is unique and draws many local BSD enthusiasts who normally wouldn't be able to travel to a conference. So she loves having the chance to talk to these people about how they are involved in the project and what they would like to do. Most of the time, they're asking her questions about how they can get more involved and how they can help, which is always encouraging because you can see that people really want to give something back and don't just take the software for free from the internet and just use it. They want to do this whole community thing, which is great. So she also writes, we attended these conferences to talk to our community members to find out what they are working on, determine the technologies that should supposed to work on FreeBSD, and what we can do to help and improve it.
Yeah, and she talked a bit about the dinner, saying magical is how I would describe the conference social event, to stand in front of the dining cruise ship on the Seine with the Eiffel Tower standing tall and lit up in the night while working, talking to our community members was incredible. But then she's like, well, that was, the middle of the conference. We should go back to the beginning.
Oh, yeah. So we started the week with a half-day board meeting on Wednesday. BSD conferences give us a chance to not only meet with community members around the world, but to have face-to-face meetings with our team members who are also located around the world. So yeah, the foundation has a monthly hangout where we do this video thing, but a meeting in person at a conference gives us a much better way of interacting and solving some of these things. I mean, we also do emails and all that stuff, but face-to-face is still the best.
Yes, I think, some of the core dinners we've got the most work done, even if they're only an hour and a bit long.
Yeah, so we worked on refining our strategic directions and goals, determining what upcoming conferences we want to present FreeBSD at, and who can give talks there and workshops, discussed current and potential software development projects, and we also discussed how we can help raise awareness about and the increased use of FreeBSD within Europe as a whole. Then Thursday was the first day of the FreeBSD Developer Summit, led by our very own Benedict, that's myself. I remember this one. This was certainly nice to run. So I surprised everyone by having us participate in a very clever quiz on France. 45 of us signed into the software where he'd shown the questions on the screen, and we had a limited amount of time to select the answers with the result listed on every screen. And it was actually a lot of fun, especially since they didn't publicize the names of the people who got the questions wrong. Yeah. The lucky, or most of us, or knowledgeable person on France was Des, yeah, so that's kind of expected, but he was still ahead.
I think the best part of it was just it got everybody in the room focused on what we were doing. Sometimes when presenting at a dev summit, it's like half the people are working on something. And while I completely understand that, actually having everybody engaged at once is quite a feat of organization. And so much applause to you for that one.
Yeah, I will repeat this one. I wasn't so successful in using it in my next class, but
the question about how many EuroBSDcons have been in France before, the answer was wrong.
Was it?
Yes.
I was looking at their website for this.
Yes, well, but the one in France before was cancelled and never actually happened.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, okay. Yeah. But did that change?
It's fine.
Ah, well.
I still wasn't anywhere close to Dez's score, so.
Yeah. I think the most difficult question was the one, how many developers are currently in the committers file, which no one could look up by now because...
I think my guess on that one was pretty close because I had looked at Kirk's makefile for doing the age thing.
Ah, right. And that has a couple of people listed.
Well,
yeah, you get a feel how many...
it involved looking at that file and seeing how many lines there were and so on, and how many dots there were on the graph.
Okay, so she continues. Some of our board members ran tutorials in parallel to the summit. So Kirk McCusick, of course, gave his legendary tutorial, an introduction to the FreeBSD open source operating system. George Neville-Neal gave his tutorial, dtrace for developers. And on the second day of the Dev Summit, in the afternoon, I had to sneak out to give a tutorial on managing BSD systems with Ansible. So she was pleased to have two chairs of the ACMW Europe ran an increasing diversity in the BSD's Birth of a Feather session for the second year in a row. So they broke up in three groups to discuss different gender bias situations and what we can do to address these types of situations to make the BSD projects more diverse, welcoming, and inclusive. At the end, people asked that we continue these discussions at future BSD conferences, and also suggested having an expert in the field give a talk on how to increase the diversity in our projects. Yeah, always.
I was there.
Topic.
You can't quite see me. I'm just beside Des here in the picture.
Ah, you're hiding. Yeah. For some reason, I couldn't get to this one.
I think it was at the same time as some other talk. It was also like on the highest floor off in a corner somewhere, but
well, yeah,
I didn't have trouble finding it. I think I was in the talk before it about, I think it was the ZFS Birds of a Feather session. And,
did you just say it? Yeah.
We might have ran almost a little overtime, and so I just didn't have time to escape. But no, I've been to the one that we had in Serbia as well, and I found it to be pretty good.
Yep, so we should definitely continue this. And then she writes, as she mentioned earlier, the social dinner was on a boat cruising along the Seine. She had a chance to talk to the community members in a more social environment. With the conference being in France, we had a lot of first-time attendees from France. Excellent. She enjoyed talking to many of them, as well as other people she only got to see at the European conferences. Sunday was full of more presentations and also conversations. During the closing session, she gave a short talk on the foundation and the work we're doing. And also I helped her, give these recognitions awards to our FreeBSD contributors who have made an impact on the projects. And that was certainly a nice way of ending a conference and honoring the people.
So they recognized Mariusz Zaborski for his work on Capsicum and converting base utilities to Capsicum. Jean-Sebastian Pedron for his work on the graphic stack and getting X and related tools up and running on modern CPUs. He did a lot of the original early work on the i915 stuff. Olivier Robert for taking great pictures at all these BSD conferences and his lots of other things that he works on for BSD. And Ed Schouten about Cloud ABI, sandboxing, and also Capsicum related work that's tangentially related to Cloud ABI.
Mm-hmm. And she closes with, we look forward to EuroBSDcon 2018 in Bucharest, Romania. And we'll keep you updated on this one as we get a website up or some more information about, call for papers and things like that. So keep watching the show.
Yes. I think also I saw on Twitter the other day, the call for papers for BSD Can stealth opened yesterday. So the call for papers hasn't actually gone out, but if you want to be the first person to submit, then if you go and click the link, it works.
It won't hold you. Yeah, excellent. So people can
but
now
reminder, you only have, less than a week to submit your proposals for EuroBSDcon. The deadline for that is December 15th.
Yep.
You need to have your proposal in for presenting at EuroBSDcon.
Yeah, could either be a talk or a tutorial. So this is an excellent opportunity to go to Japan and give a talk there with a couple of people in attendance. Or actually a lot of them. Not just a couple of them. So, time for our news roundup this week. We start with playing with the Pi N64. Pi N64 is not the mail editor in this time, or not the mail program. This is, of course, the embedded boards, Pi N64. So this is over at changeown.me. Excellent URL, by the way. So this is a blog post by Daniel Jacotz. I hope that's correct. He writes that he got 2 Pi N64 boards and he wants to install certain software on it. Of course, BSD. And first item is, of course, finding something to install on it. So 6 weeks ago, he writes, I ordered 2 Pi N64 units. I didn't and still don't have much plan for them, but I wanted to play with some cheap boards. I finally received them this week. Initially, I wanted to install some Linux stuff on it. I didn't have much requirements, so I thought I would just look what seems to be easy and the best supported system, D flavor. Well, so he headed over to their wiki. Everything seemed either not really maintained, done by some random people, or both. So he's not saying random people do bad things, just that installing some random things from the internet is not really his cup of coffee or tea. So he heard about ARMbian, which is a mixture probably of Debian and ARM64, or in this case Pi N64, but the server flavor seemed to be experimental, so he got scared of it. And sadly, the whole things look like to be a lot on demand. So he went for OpenBSD, because he knows the stuff and who has to kindly ask for help. Spoiler alert, it's boring because it just works. So then he continues with getting OpenBSD on it. So he downloaded the miniroot62.fs, he did that onto the micro SD card, and he was afraid he'd need to fiddle with some things like sysutil/DTB because it doesn't know whether he need that to get it working. That's because he doesn't know what it does, and for this precise reason he was wrong and didn't need to do that. So this is totally not necessary. So just dd the miniroot62.fs and you can go to the next checkpoint. So then you plugged in an HDMI cable, Ethernet cable, and the power, and it booted, of course. So he also writes, I could read for 10 seconds, but then it got dark. Okay, not good. Of course, it's because you need a serial console. Of course, he didn't have one. Well, yeah. So he thought about trying to install OpenBSD blindly, because some people just notice that enter, number, enter, things like that. But he could have probably succeeded with auto install. But following some good pieces of advice from OpenBSD people, he bought some CP2102. He didn't try to understand what it was or what.
USB serial adapter.
That's what it's for. Sounded to me like explosive or something. I bought some CP2102. Yeah, okay, so this is the serial adapter. He looked how to plug that thing in. It appears you can plug in 2 different places, but if you plug it in the Euler bus, it would power a bit the board, so that if you try to reboot it, it would then mess with the power disruption and could lead to an unclean reboot. And this is not what you want to have. So you just need to plug 3 cables, the ground cable, the TXD cable, and the RXD cable. Of course, the TXD goes on the RXD pin from the picture, and the RXD goes to the TXD pin. Guess why I'm telling you that? Yeah, because you did it wrong first time.
Right. One's transmit and one is receive, and so transmit on the one side needs to go to the receive on the other side, and vice versa.
Yeah, you only do this wrong just once, and then you know it forever. That's basically it. Then you can just connect with the CU utility to def CU A U0, in this case the first 0 port, and you also define the baud rate for that, and then you can actually install the thing. Yeah, we have a nice screenshot here with the whole booting process. Yeah, and then you just have it done, and then you just wait for your cat to destroy the whole thing. And there's a picture here from his cat. So yeah, that's certainly, you just set up a fresh system and then something awful happens to it. And then you have to run it all over again. Yeah, so
yes,
nice and short.
If I had more free time, I would play with a bunch of this stuff. We just got 2 Rock 64s, which is another product from the same company that makes the Pine 64. It's the same shape and the ports are in the same places as a Raspberry Pi, so it fits existing like Raspberry Pi cases, but it has a real Ethernet adapter instead of USB, and it has, in addition to the USB 2 ports, it also has a USB 3 port. Ooh. And so we're hoping to make a little video appliance out of it.
Oh, that would be cool. Yeah, and apparently the BSDs, or at least OpenBSD in this case, run well on it. So people shouldn't be afraid to get one and try it out for themselves. All right, our next story is, what's the point of Docker on FreeBSD or Solaris? I think you should take that one, Alan.
Yes. There are some usefulnesses for it. But anyway, so the blog post here starts out saying, Penguinisters are very keen on their Docker, but for the rest of us, it may be difficult to see what all the fuss is about. It's only been around for a couple of years and everybody's talking about it. And somebody asked again today, what are we missing? They say, well, Docker is a solution to a Linux and Windows problem that FreeBSD and Solaris don't have. Until recently, the Linux kernel only implemented the original user isolation model involving chroot. Most recent kernels have had control groups added, which are intended to provide isolation for a group of processes, like a namespace. This comes out of Google, and they've extended it to the concept to include processor resources allocated to one of these knobs, which could be a good idea for FreeBSD. So in FreeBSD, we have RCTL, although CPU limiting on it is a little primitive. They say the scheduler is aware of the jail ID of a process. It's about to schedule, and I might have to look in forthcoming winter evening, but digressing. So if isolation or containerization in Linux terms is in the Linux kernel, what is Docker bringing to the party? The only thing I can think of is its standardization and its easy user interface at the expense of having Python installed. You might think of it as similar terms to something like EasyJail, a complex system intended to be something that was otherwise very simple. To make a jail on FreeBSD, you need to do is copy the files from your system into a directory. Then you can even be a whole server system disk if you'd like, and jails can run inside other jails. When you create a very simple config file, giving it a jail name, the path to your files, and an IP address, and then you can just service jail, name of jail start, and it goes from there. So they ask, what is the advantage of running Docker? Well, in a way, there is. Docker has a repository of system images that can just install and run, and that's what a lot of people want. There's a bit like virtual appliances, but kind of mind-numbingly inefficient. You can actually run Docker on FreeBSD. A port was done a couple of years ago, but it relies on the 64-bit Linux emulation that started to appear in FreeBSD 10. Newer versions of FreeBSD, it got better. Docker is a port/sysutils docker-FreeBSD. It makes use of jails instead of Linux cgroups and requires ZFS rather than UFS for file system isolation. I believe the Linux version uses Union FS, or I think they call overlay FS, but apparently not an expert on Linux. The FreeBSD port work with the Docker Hub repository, giving you access to thousands of pre-packaged system images to play with. And that's about as far as the blog post here has ever tested it. If you want to run them really tricky stuff like Windows, you probably want to do hardware emulation with something like Zen. If you want to deploy and migrate FreeBSD or Solaris systems, just copy a new tarball into the directory and go. It's no problem, and why make it more complicated? Given the increasing frequency Docker turns up in conversations, it's probably worth taking seriously as Linux applications get packaged up into images for easy access. Jails and zones may be more efficient, and Docker images are limited to binary, but convenience tends to win over in many environments. So quite a bit has changed with Docker in the last year or two as they've tried to get away from some of the early problems they had. So the newer versions of Docker that aren't ported to FreeBSD yet include abstracting into a bunch of separate tools so that those individual components can be ported specifically to different operating systems. So when containerd, or whatever they call it, for Docker, if that was actually ported properly to FreeBSD, it means Docker would end up using jails and not having to, the individual containers wouldn't have to know about that. The Docker infrastructure would just know, oh, this is FreeBSD, so I'll use a jail to do this. Part of that is automatically setting up the networking and the NAT and so on, so that the jail will just, or the Docker image will just work. I think the real appeal of Docker is I need a jail set up with Nginx. And if you can just type Docker Nginx up or Docker up Nginx or whatever it is, and boom, you have a jail with that going, that'd be very useful. And it's just something where the infrastructure work for that was just never done for jails or even zones, so that there were these pre-built images. And I think part of it is we could also have a Docker repository for FreeBSD native images. Currently, when you download a Docker image and run it on FreeBSD, it's a Linux image and you're using the Linux emulation. But if the porting effort actually were finished and we had this, when you do Docker up Nginx, it would actually go to a FreeBSD repository, get a FreeBSD-based system and a FreeBSD package of Nginx and install them in a jail, basically. So if we had package-based, then it would basically be down to, a Docker recipe that says, oh, you want an Nginx jail? All right, let me install a FreeBSD-based system and install the Nginx package and configure the network, and boom, it's good to go.
Yeah, so it's convenient to use, but
I've basically, after some discussions at BSD Cambridge with some actual Docker developers who happen to be OpenBSD users, they described how Docker has finally matured from the kind of crazy Linux thing it was into a more useful tool that's actually not Linux specific, because they wanted it to work on macOS and Windows and hopefully someday BSDs. And so now that a lot of the work upstream has been done to separate the different components, it's possible to port a couple of those pieces to FreeBSD and have it all work very nicely.
That would be good, yeah. And
yes, with enough effort put into it, it could end up where Docker works better on FreeBSD because we have real jails than it does on Linux.
Yeah, the whole isolation thing and keeping it secure is easier on FreeBSD, or better implemented.
Well, especially if you go to a slightly more non-binary image, where a package-based type thing, where you can actually upgrade the Docker image and have the security updates instead of stale images.
Yeah, this is a different story then. Yeah.
Yep.
Now we'll see how the Docker story is coming along on the BSDs.
This week's episode is also brought to you by our friends over at IX Systems. Head over to ixsystems.com/BSD Now and you get the ultimate guide to buying a new server for open source.
yeah, especially if you're planning a new server purchase and figuring out, I'm not sure which components are best for my use case, then just ask IX Systems, because they have built thousands of these systems for customers, and they just know what your needs are by, you say, I want to use this component, and then it will say, oh, but then this other component won't work so well with it. Or they would say, to make it more faster, you need this other component, which would make it much quicker, because it's...
Yes, or, most likely it's like, that's not the type of SSD you're actually going to want to use for that part of ZFS. If you want to do a read cache, you want this type of SSD, and a write cache, you want that type of SSD. And, you definitely don't want that RAID controller. You want just a simple HBA. It'll save you money, and it'll be better.
And especially for open source, they have a lot of experience, because in most of their storage products, or almost all of them, they're using ZFS. So they have the experience, they have the expertise to make this system that's not just performant, but also keeps your data secure using ZFS.
And actually, I just saw on Twitter, the IT Press Tour is going to be visiting IX tomorrow. So they'll be visiting IX, but also a couple other FreeBSD-related companies. Minio, which makes a kind of AWS API compatibility thing, so that you could turn your FreeNAS into S3 type storage. So you could stop using Amazon and run local storage or whatever. But also Panasas, which is a FreeBSD-based storage appliance.
Oh yeah, excellent. There's also a blog post recently.
Yes.
They had, if they put the FreeNAS Minis or the Mini XL on the side, it would look much cooler than standing, upright.
Yes, I saw that one. But they also have their recap of BSD Taiwan.
Oh yeah, they sponsored that one?
Yep.
Excellent, yeah.
And
so
a bunch of people there.
Yeah, IX is sponsoring a lot of open source conferences and BSD conferences in particular, to get the community exposed to, what they're doing internally, and also what other people are doing, and what things they could integrate into their own products. Because they're not only just doing hardware, they're also doing, the other cool things like FreeNAS and TrueOS and Lumina. So there's a bunch of stuff coming out of that house for that company.
Yeah. I've talked quite a bit about these hardware I bought recently, so, it's obvious that I trust them, and if you trust me, then the transitive properties of trust. But, they've really saved my bacon a few times. It's like, I need these servers all shipped, and I'm going to be off in Taiwan while that happens, so if you could just make that happen without needing me to do anything, that would be great. And they did. And I don't know what more I could possibly ask for them. They made it all just happen. So head over to ixsystems.com/BSD Now, get in touch with them, tell them we sent you. They'll be extra nice.
Okay, our next story is the Network Manager Control for OpenBSD. So this is a utility that's been developed. So my first impression was that it's similar to network managers on other Unix systems. I think it's
but it's for OpenBSD, so I assume it's much less terrible than Network Manager for Linux.
Yeah. With the OpenBSD integration, like doas is involved, and
also it starts out with I propose you a small shell script instead of some horrible daemon that modifies your config files when you didn't ask it to.
Yeah, and can't get it right once you do it manually again. So yeah, so Network Manager Control is, as Alan said, a small script allowing you to easily manage your network's connections. So, and this script is integrated with the OpenBox dynamic menus, and moreover, it also allows you to automatically have the connections you have predefined based. So, so the author of this blog, Vincent, He was frustrated to not be able to swap quickly from one network interface to another to connect simply and quickly to his Wi-Fi or to cable connection to the Wi-Fi of a friend and many other networks. Every time you have to type the ifconfig commands. This is nice but boring. Surely, when you are in the middle of a presentation and you just want a quick connection to your mobile in tethering mode, there are better ways to do this. So thanks to OpenBSD, those commands are not so hard. But this frustrated him to not be able to do it with just one click. Directly from his Windows environment, or his windowing environment, since he's using OpenBSD or OpenBox from a menu of OpenBox in the corner. So he looked around to see what is currently existing. One tool that he found was netctl. The idea is to have a repository of hostname.if files ready to use for different cases. The idea sounds great, he writes, but he had some difficulties using it. And what annoys him the most is that it modified the current hostname.if files in /etc. So in his eyes, he would avoid to modify those files completely because they are his network or his working bases. So he wants to rely on them and make sure that his networks are working back to a normal mode after a reboot so that everything is nice and dandy back then. Nevertheless, if he would install if he understood netctl, you have a feature where it will look for the predefined network config matching the environment where you are, and that's actually very cool. So after having played with that a little bit, you can he figured out why not write his own utility in Python. Why Python, he writes? Well, just because it's the easiest programming language for him to use, and it should be easy enough to rewrite in shell, more standard in the OpenBSD world than Python. So it's easy. So he linked to his SourceForge account, and you can just download the latest version and just make install as usual as root, and then has a couple of prerequisites to check. So Python 2.7 is needed to be installed, and then since that nmctl needs to be run as root, he strongly recommends that to use or run it via doas. So that's OpenBSD's sudo replacement. So config file, then you have to, of course, create a config file to store in /etc nmctl, and the file must respect a few rules. So it's based on blocks, so each block needs to start with a line having the following format, so the name and then an interface name, so that the utility can parse that out of the config file. And there's a couple of other rules. So basically, you put all these commands that nmctl will apply to the interface to which these commands are referring to, and then you will always have ifconfig interface name command you type in the config file, and there's also a man page for that utility if you want to know more specific commands. And you have basically two macros. So NWID refers to the NWID when you select an open Wi-Fi with the /open option for nmctl, and random MAC, which is a macro generating a random MAC address for you. This is useful as a DHCP test server, for example, and other ways to obscure your real MAC address. And the keyword DHCP will trigger a command like dhclient for the interface, which is nice. And here's a sample config file here for people to start with. So he has a cable network here and a Wi-Fi network, so we can nicely switch between those. And then he writes about the integration with OpenBox. So thanks to the dynamic menu feature of OpenBox, you can have your different predefined networks under one click of your mouse. So you just create an entry in your menu, give it an ID. So this is menu XML in the /config/OpenBox menu XML, and you provide basically a new ID in HTML, not HTML, XML. And there you
basically it runs nmctl-list to get a list of your preconfigured networks, or nmctl-scan to scan for open networks.
Yeah, and then you can run this from the little menu that you can have in your OpenBox, and that's pretty much all that you want to run on a day-to-day basis.
He says the most important part is the -restart option. which will basically loop over the available networks and find the one where it can actually reach the internet. Currently defined as being able to ping Google, but you can adjust that. So it will just cycle through your pre-configured networks trying to find the one that works in the priority order.
Yeah, seems like an easy enough utility, to use. And this should also be possible to port to other BSD systems.
Yep.
Yeah, very nice. People should check the full blog post out and use it on either OpenBSD or port it to other BSDs. That could also be relatively straightforward to do.
Yep.
Now that you know how to create ports, this is see what we're doing here. All right. Our next story is OpenVPN setup guide for FreeBSD. Oh, yes. Over at coffee.net. Oh, excellent.
Spelled with a 0.
Yeah.
Browse securely from anywhere using your personal VPN using OpenVPN, LDAP, FreeBSD, and PF. A VPN allows you to securely extend a private network over the internet via tunneling protocols and traffic encryption. For most people, a VPN offers 2 primary features. 1, the ability to access services on your local network over the internet, and 2, secure internet connectivity over an untrusted network. In this guide, we'll describe how to set up a personal VPN using OpenVPN on FreeBSD. The configuration will use both SSL certificates and LDAP credentials for authentication. We'll also use the PF firewall for NAT so that your VPN will be able to use your home internet connection or the internet connection of wherever you install the VPN server. One important note about running your own VPN, make sure you are most likely hosting your VPN server using some hosting provider with a public IP address allocated specifically for you. Your VPN will not give you any extra anonymity on the internet, right? Obviously, that one IP address tracks back to your VPS, which tracks back to your credit card. If anything, you'll be masking yourself you're making yourself more of a target since all your activity can be trivially traced back to your server's IP address. So while your VPN will protect you from the snooping hackers on the free Wi-Fi at Starbucks, it won't protect you from, investigations and so on. This guide assumes you're running FreeBSD with a PF firewall. If you're using a different Unix flavor, you'll probably get most of this, but you might have to change a couple things. Finally, we've used example.com and a non-routable public IP address for all of our examples. In this guide, you'll need to replace those with your own correct IP addresses. So after you install OpenVPN, so they go here and build the port actually, but you can install the package. Then they edit the config file, set the port it's going to listen on, the protocol, what network interface it's going to use, etc. Provide the SSL certificates with nice little comments here suggesting that you change those. The subnet is going to use, etc. Then they set up LDAP authentication. So they install the OpenVPN auth LDAP package so that OpenVPN can authenticate against LDAP. And they configure it to connect to LDAP on localhost. They also talk a bit about running your own DNS resolver for your VPN. And then they talk about using the EasyRSA package to actually set up the certificates for your VPN. And they note that you might want to generate the keys offline and then put them on your VPS or whatever, rather than having the whole certificate authority and all the sensitive files live on the VPS. But they show how to configure it. They're creating certificates that last for 10 years. Init the PKI, build a certificate authority, and generate the server certificate. Then they copy those to the right locations and so that they match the config file. And then using sysrc or editing rc.conf, enable OpenVPN and start it. And now you'll have a VPN. And then they show the small section of PF config to actually NAT out to your external IP address any traffic on your VPN network.
Yeah, otherwise the firewall will block this. Not
Yep. So then once you enable IP forwarding and start PF, then you will then have your traffic from your VPN will be proxied to the internet via NAT.
Yep. So if you're at a hotel or at a train station or airport that does have an open Wi-Fi, you still have no one listening on your connectivity because you're in your own virtual private network.
Yep. And, if you set it up to look like a web server or something on your VPS, then, a hotel that allows connections over SSL but doesn't allow, SSH means you can tunnel out with your VPN to your home and then from there be able to SSH to whatever you need to do. Yeah, it's not something you need until you need it. So, and then they have instructions on setting up a client, how to configure the client.conf and generate the certificates for that and install them on your machine. So they show the easy RSA commands to build a client, set that up, copy files over or whatever, and there you go.
Yeah, very nice tutorial, straightforward, and should be easy to follow.
Exactly. And they say, in conclusion, a VPN is a must-have tool to protect your privacy, especially when using a sketchy public network. It also provides a reliable and convenient way to securely access your personal intranet, or internal network. That's my main use of it is, I want to access, the file I need I left on my desktop at work. I need to be able to connect from here to there and copy the file. And, all those machines aren't directly exposed to the internet, so a VPN is the best way to do that. Recent versions of OpenVPN have a small resource footprint, making it suitable to use on even a small DigitalOcean droplet or something.
For example.
When maxing out my server's internet connection with the speed test, the OpenVPN delivered 85 megabits while using less than 50% of a single CPU core. With typical traffic, the system load is very minimal.
Yeah, especially for this 1 week or 3 weeks, or not 3 weeks, 3 days where you are at a conference and the other days you're back home, you're using the VPN not as much, but only on these couple of days where you need it, there might be a little bit more traffic, but it shouldn't run your bill over the normal limit. Time for our BSD bits this week. The first bit is actually a reminder. So remember this year we had BSDCon in June. It's been a while, but now more and more people are reminding us that more people, not people, videos are showing up at the BSDCon conference channel on YouTube. So more and more talks are now available there. You should check them out.
As Dan gets through editing more of the videos, he posts them. And so there's a couple of interesting ones that have come up while we've been catching up with the news, including actually this one here. Sami Bahara has Debugging the Debugger. Sami Al-Bahara is the author of the article we did at the beginning of the show about the debuggability of compilers. And so if that was interesting to you, then check out his 45-minute talk about debugging the debugger. And also check out the rest of the blog posts over at the backtrace.io. They have one by Will Andrews, another FreeBSD committer, who wrote about speeding up some of, I think, the crash dump code by a huge margin and so on. A bunch of other interesting bits. Another talk that came up recently is Li Wen's continuous integration for the FreeBSD project. You might know Li Wen as the organizer of BSD Taiwan that we just got back from. But Jenkins is and continuous integration in general is a very hot topic right now. So learning a bit about it can be quite the boost to your resume, but also it's just how most open source projects are starting to trend towards. And so it's also a great way for not necessarily C developers, but people with other skills who want to get involved in FreeBSD. The continuous integration team is looking for more people, and it's a great way to get involved and help FreeBSD without necessarily having to be a C developer.
Yeah, writing tests and figuring out what went wrong from the reports from Jenkins. This is some good entry point here. Yeah, so check out the whole list of BSDcon if you haven't been there, or you were just in that other talk section where you couldn't, make the decision which one you want to go to.
I think there were 2 talks I was really looking forward to, and then I got involved in conversations in the hallway, and then ended up in that conversation in the hallway for 2.5 hours, missing both of the talks entirely.
Yeah. But yeah, that's why we record these.
And then so that people another one of the talks, my phone kept ringing, so I had to leave for a bit and miss a chunk of it. And fun times.
Yeah, so it's a good, reminiscing of the open conference that we had there, BSDcon, and we're already looking forward to the next one. Our next item in the BSD Bits section is getting started with OpenBSD device driver development. So this is a EuroBSDcon paper over at openbsd.org. There's the link to it from Stefan Sperling. And so he basically introduces the whole, what binary drivers are, what are source code blobs. So these are drivers where you cannot get the source for. And so a couple of drivers he has worked on. So HSC has scratched so he has a whole list of mostly network drivers. So there's a bunch of, also HP LaserJet firmware loading and, of course, bug fixes and 802.11n. So he has a bunch of drivers done. So that should be a good indication of that he knows what he's talking about. And this is a pretty extensive PDF with not only explanations, but also a couple of pictures and a lot of source code. So this should get people started in 46 slides altogether. This would actually be a nice tutorial, actually, for another conference in the future, maybe. Yeah, so if you're interested in developing an OpenBSD driver or any kind of device driver you're thinking of, then check out the PDF and get started with the actual. Oh, there's a picture of Henning, of course. The PDF gets you started with the basics, and that hopefully will lead you to more driver development on OpenBSD. The next bit we have is AWS CloudWatch Logs agent for FreeBSD. So this is for their Amazon cloud, of course.
Quick note here just says, I love AWS and FreeBSD, but sometimes they don't love each other. Some AWS services treat FreeBSD as a second-class citizen. One such is the AWS agent setup script that actually, or the daemon is just some Python script that runs fine, but the installer is Linux only. So I adapted the install script so it runs on FreeBSD. It works well even though my Python foo is not the strongest and my sh shell scripting is even worse. Take a look at the script and use it at your own risk. And they provide a GitHub gist. But if someone were to take that and maybe improve it a little bit and make a port out of it, then it could be available to people running FreeBSD on AWS.
Hint, hint.
You can make a big difference to a lot of people with a tiny bit of shell script.
Yeah. So, it's a good project to take on. For our next bit, which is, the FreeBSD Foundation November 27 development project update, I should switch gears here, headgear. So let me do this. Warmer ears. So from time to time we give a development project update because we at the foundation sponsor a couple of development projects, as you might know. And there's a lot of work in progress. So this is an update of what these projects are doing and some kind of work they've already produced. And we have a couple of projects that are supported by individual grants and student stipends, as well as work being done by the foundation's own staff and cooperative education students from the University of Waterloo. And so this month's Ed Mask gives us an overview of the FreeBSD supported projects. So there's a relatively large project that's
this is to support online RAID Z expansion in ZFS. So that is, you have a file server or NAS or whatever that has one or more RAID Z VDEVs. And say, it's got 5 disks, and you would really like to have 6 disks. Before, that was just, that doesn't work with ZFS. You'd have to add like 5 more disks. But Matt has come up with an idea on how to make this work, and the project's being co-funded by the FreeBSD Foundation, Delphix, and IX Systems, and hopefully there'll be a presentation about it at BSDCon next year with a progress report, and hopefully even be finished in time for the ZFS Developer Summit next October. And we will have this feature, and you'll be able to just add individual disks to an existing RAID Z and get the extra space. It is the most requested feature in ZFS, in the history of ZFS, and the FreeBSD Foundation, IX Systems, and Delphix are happy to work together to make that happen.
Yep. So there's progress being made. So Matt Ahrens is working on this from over at Delphix. So he has been making good progress, and the blog post says we expect the feature to be committed to FreeBSD in 2018 in time for FreeBSD 12. So this is one thing people are looking for. Another project is from Edward Napirala, which is working on a project grant for improving the out-of-the-box experience with FreeBSD as a USB target hardware for the BeagleBone Black, so that FreeBSD can emulate a variety of USB devices when the hardware supports USB on the go. But configuration is inflexible and cumbersome currently, so the goal of this project is to allow a single USB cable to provide power and a USB connection to the FreeBSD target, and have the FreeBSD operating system provide an emulated serial console, a network interface, and mass storage, so that people can use this BeagleBone much easier with just a single cable. So there's some initial code already committed. Some cleanup is also part of the project, and currently he's working on implementing automatic re-enumbering of the USB target. Re-enumeration. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's finding the list of them, like rescanning the bus and finding all the different targets.
Mm-hmm. There's also Landon Fuller.
Another one, Landon Fuller is making great progress on his project to modernize the Broadcom Wi-Fi stack infrastructure on FreeBSD. Many changes have been committed to FreeBSD already, and additional changes are currently under review. They also say we have been providing stipends to 2 master's students at the University Polytechnica of Bucharest. Darius Mihai and Alexandru Elise are both working on projects involving the Beehive hypervisor for the ARM processor. Darius is improving the existing 32-bit ARM v7 Beehive port, while Alexandru is porting Beehive to the ARM v8 64-bit AR64. Both of these projects are showing promising results.
Yep. And as part of the partnership with Intel, the foundation staff member, Caustic, that most people know him from that nickname, is continuing to add support for a recent generation of Intel CPUs, because we now get more documentation from Intel directly, so we know which registers we need to access.
Specifically the higher-end things like the tracing capabilities and stuff in your CPUs. PCM, PMC, all that stuff.
Yep, these performance counters are important because they're a good resource for not only debugging but also knowing what's going on. So Caustic is also developing kernel-side non-volatile memory, also known as NVDIMM support, and he has also shared an initial patch already for review and testing. So that's exciting. So we have also co-op students. So Zach Nafziger has been working on a number of projects. So he investigated first the Lua Loader project produced during a previous Google Summer of Code, and has been collaborating with FreeBSD developers working on integrating this into FreeBSD.
Yep.
There's also some work left incomplete from GSoC and the previous efforts to integrate the project into FreeBSD, and Zach has updated the Lua Loader with a goal of bringing it to parity with the existing loader, so that we can switch at one day to a Lua-based loader. And he has also been working on integrating UEFI secure boot support and has working a prototype that actually undergoes additional development before being merged into FreeBSD. And he also has been installing and testing FreeBSD on a number of ARM and MIPS-based single board computers.
Ooh, I have to see if he's had any chance to play with the Onion Omega 2. And if not, maybe I can mail him one of mine to work with. Although I'm sure Ed has a bunch of them at the office. So.
And the other co-op student goes by the nickname Scotty, has been fixing a number of FreeBSD bugs and has added test cases to the Capsicum test suite so that test coverage is in place for future FreeBSD improvements and bug fixes. Nice. He's currently working on the syscaller, Sizkaller, which is a kernel syscall fuzzing project. And so they aim to set this up permanently so that it's running, searching for weaknesses in various syscalls on an ongoing basis. And he has submitted bug reports for fixes for issues they found during the syscalling process. So this is hopefully in the future integrated with the continuous integration we have in place so that people get continuous reports about syscalls not working as they supposed to. And finally, Ed Mast himself has been working on collaborating with other FreeBSD developers on a number of toolchain improvements. So this is an ongoing project for years now. And they're making good progress on migrating to a modern, permissively licensed toolchain for our Tier 1 architectures. And one of the final pieces for that is the adoption of LLVM's LLD linker. It is ready for use in the base system, but a number of software packages in the third-party ports collection are currently incompatible with the LLD. So they are working currently through addressing these before LLD is enabled by default in the system. And many of these projects wouldn't have been possible without the donations people are doing to the FreeBSD Foundation and their continuous support, whether it's monetary or with hardware or other ways that people provide the FreeBSD project with the resources that they need. So these will make a significant contribution to FreeBSD 12. And if you want to support these efforts, then I encourage you to donate even small amounts to the FreeBSD Foundation, and this will continue making these developments possible in the future. Okay, and our last item is the schedule for the BSD Dev Room at FOSDEM 2018 has been published already, way ahead of the other developer rooms, I might add. I've been looking at what the other tracks are doing, so each of them are still not listing anything, but the BSD Dev Room is like coming along quite
yes,
nice.
A nice full schedule. So also not starting too early in the morning, so super props to...
people should be awake by then.
Rosario for doing that. The FreeBSD Foundation and How It Is Changing the World by Debug, followed by LSCPU for BSDs by Nanzing, who is actually someone whose work we've been following on their blog on the show for the last couple of weeks, so it'd be great to meet them in person. Seven Janian will be talking about BSD from scratch to OS with ease with NetBSD. Then Luco Pizzamiglio will be talking about POT, another container framework based on Jails and ZFS, a personal and educational project on running containers with the power of FreeBSD. Mecca will be talking about CBSD, the isolation manager, how to manage Jails, Beehive, VMs, and Zen with CBSD while keeping it all simple. Benny Siegert will be talking about package source for Chrome OS, which is interesting. Antoine Jacotot will be talking about syspatch, the system maintenance tool for OpenBSD. Vincent Delft, who we just covered his NMCTL work blog post, he'll be talking about OpenBSD as a house alarm system, which is an interesting IoT type thing, done hopefully securely with OpenBSD. I'll be presenting ZFS Advanced Integration, similar but different from what I did in Taiwan.
It will be a full room.
Yep.
I can tell you that already.
We'll be talking about configuring and building base on FreeBSD, making things easier for the user. And then some person I've never heard of, Benedict Reuscheling, something, will be reflections on teaching a Unix class using FreeBSD.
Yeah, so this is the class I've been teaching in English for 3 years now, and in German for even longer. So this is not just showing what I'm doing, but also getting some input from the audience, what they think is important that we should teach in the future with FreeBSD. And hopefully this will improve the class or the actual content of the class. Yeah, so check out the BSD Dev Room. Go there if you're in the area. Go to FOSDEM. It's a big conference, not just this one dev room, but a lot of other things.
Yeah,
we also
like literally thousands of people. It's kind of it's different than any other conference for sure.
Yeah, and we also got word that the FreeBSD Foundation or the FreeBSD project will have a project booth. So if you want to talk to us directly, we'll be there in the operating system section next to the innermost.
If you're going to be there, we're also going to need some help staffing the booth. In particular, there are some times where Benedict and I will be speaking and someone will have to be at the booth. So
yeah.
I know it's a slightly weird ask, but if you would like to volunteer to miss my talk and cover the booth during that time, we'd be very appreciative.
Yeah, there will be recordings. You don't miss everything. All right. So before we go into our feedback and questions section this week, we should also present the sponsor for this one, which is, of course, Tarsnap. Go to tarsnap.com if you want to have online backups for the truly paranoid. Why paranoid? Because there might be people out there stealing your stuff that you upload to the cloud for backups. But with Tarsnap, you're the only person holding the key for the decryption. So everything is encrypted locally on your box before it's sent out to the cloud, in this case, Amazon's AWS, and you're the only person who can decrypt it.
Yes, all you have to do is keep the one key safe and everything is fine. But don't be like our friend and lose your key, because then you can't decrypt anything.
Yep, no one else can help.
Backups aren't very useful if they're all encrypted and you've lost the key. Luckily, he managed to find his backup of the key and restore his files. But you do want to encrypt the backups because you don't want all your personal files and data and so on just stored on the cloud somewhere. Who knows how many copies there are? Who knows how many people have access to them? Not just malicious administrators at some place like Amazon, but also governments that are spying on Amazon or governments that will subpoena Amazon for your files and all these possible things that could happen. But if it's all encrypted with a key that only you have and that key has never been transmitted to anyone else or shared with anyone, then that's the only way to know your files are safe. And it's the only way to ensure that you can destroy the data. Because the data on the cloud is backed up and replicated and so on, the delete command is really useless. But if it's encrypted with a key, all you do is change your backups to use a new key and destroy the old key, and now all those backups from before are destroyed, no use, no one can ever decrypt them because the only copy of the key has been destroyed.
Yeah, and Tarsnap provides the whole infrastructure and management about doing this and makes it easy for you to use, so you can just focus on your backups and then sleep a little bit easier knowing that you're the only person who can access those backups. Yeah, so check out Tarsnap, and yeah, hopefully you like their service.
Mm-hmm. And yes, it only costs $5 to get started. You might as well give it a try.
Yeah, easy enough. All right, feedback and question time. The first item we got is from Matt about the show and Cantrell. I see where this is going. So he writes to the BSD Now team. As a viewer of the show, I wanted to take a moment to express my gratitude for all the work you put into keeping it going. I hope that you never doubt the value of the show, but should you ever question whether your time would be better spent cutting code, know this. It is especially important for those of us who do not work exclusively in tech to hear you advocate for various technologies, to hear firsthand from key developers about their priorities and progress, and to hear you opine, is it opine? Yeah, on potential configurations or help solve listeners' roadblocks. It has encouraged him, especially, to introduce BSD into his environment and to do more programming, personally and professionally. Oh, that's good. It has convinced him also of the importance of code quality in production systems, and also has turned him into a stakeholder as an annual financial contributor. Ooh, wow. Just from our show. See? This is great. Thanks for the feedback. And finally, one of the favorite guests on BSD Now, not just his, but no surprise here, is Brian Cantrell. He recently enjoyed the reruns in the form of a Cantrilogy on a long road trip. He had been saving it for such an occasion, so much better than country music, radio evangelism, and conservative talk radio through rural America. Admittedly, a low standard to beat. No offense, that's just what's on the air. Yeah, I had rewatched those as well because I wanted to know the time index for the RM-RF story, because I was playing this on my class the other day because I wanted to explain the importance of initializing your variables, RM-RF, $1 and $2. So that everyone liked that specific part because, the way it's presented and the story itself. So he also continues to write, imagine his surprise then when he noticed his local tech community was putting on a conference here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, with one Brian Cantrell headlining the first day of speakers. So he bought a ticket and attended the event. Excellent. It was well worth it. He got to see several excellent speakers that he never thought would come out to Pittsburgh. Of course, Brian did not disappoint. His presentation exceeded all expectations, and he even had a chance to chat with him briefly earlier in the day. Oh, great. You have something ahead of me, at least. So envious now. I let him know I enjoyed his appearances on BSD Now. Excellent. Yeah, this makes it probably that he will come again in the future. So
yes, yeah. He gave positive indications of that when I saw him in person at the OpenZFS Dev Summit.
Excellent.
Because he happened to walk up as Chris Moore and I were sitting down for breakfast on the first day. And he's like, oh, you people really exist. You're not just from the internet.
And you have a lower body, and it's like, yeah. Okay, yeah. Like Brian, he too is the son of a physician, so he's very much enjoying Brian's medical anecdotes. He struck the perfect balance between hilarity and gravity in a profound talk about consequence of what happens at the hardware level in diagnosing problems in information systems. Firmware bugs are no doubt troubling. As I understand it, videos from the talks will be made available. He highly recommends it to our viewers.
This email's from a bit ago, so the
talk is up on YouTube.
The videos are already up, yes. I've watched it. It is well worth watching.
Yeah, I should put up some kind of alert, so if there's a new video that has title with Brian Cantrell in it.
There's too many videos for me to watch. So next up, Paolo has a question. FreeBSD question. It says, hello, Benedict and Alan. Thanks for the great show and all the answers to other questions I've had in the previous episodes. Here's another one I was hoping you guys could help me out with. I'm running FreeBSD 11.1 and wonder if it's possible to add a second hard drive for mirroring to add redundancy to the system if my existing hard drive fails. This system is already running with a dozen different jails configured, and I would like to avoid having to do a fresh install. It says, Gpart tells me I have 3 partitions, FreeBSD boot, FreeBSD swap, and FreeBSD-ZFS, which makes me think that this is not possible. I not only want to back up my ZFS dataset to be mirrored, but also the boot partition, as I could always boot from the other drive, and so on. So you don't have to actually mirror the boot partition. You can just install the boot code twice. So best bet for this one is run the command gpart space backup space the name of the first disk, and that will basically make a text version of the partition table. Pipe that into gpart restore the new disk, and it will basically mirror the partitions from the old disk onto the new disk. Now that you have that, you'll have that same partition layout, although the partitions will be empty. Then if you use the command zpool status, and it'll print out your current zpool, then do zpool attach, not add, attach the pool name and the name of your existing ZFS disk, then the name of the new disk. In particular, the name of the partition. So, ADA1P3 or whatever one is your FreeBSD-ZFS partition on the new disk. Then that will start mirroring the data from your old disk to your new disk for the ZFS partition. So that's taken care of now. When you do that, it'll also give you a note. Make sure you install the boot code. So you'll do gpart boot code minus b/boot/pmbr minus p/boot/gbd/zfs boot, like it says, minus i1 ada1 or whatever your new disk is. And that will install the boot code. Because the boot code doesn't change very often, generally only when you're upgrading major versions of FreeBSD and doing zpool upgrade. And every time you do zpool upgrade, it'll remind you to update the boot code in each disk. You don't really have to worry about mirroring that exactly. As long as it's installed on both, it doesn't ever change. Again, except for during upgrades of ZFS. Then the swap, you could use gmirror to start swapping, mirroring your swap so that if one of the disks dies, it doesn't take half your swap with it, which can be especially problematic if there's some stuff swapped out because you can't swap it back in if the disk is gone. So for that one, you want to do swap off -A to dismount all your swap. Then you can do gmirror, follow the instructions from the FreeBSD handbook and mirror those two partitions, and you'll end up with a new /dev/mirror/ whatever you called it. And then edit your etcfs tab and change the device name for your swap to be that new device, dev mirror gswap or whatever you call it. And then swap on -A, and you'll be on mirrored swap. And you can do all of this without rebooting.
Yeah.
Super easy.
Yeah, just to make
I'm
sure
working on making it even easier, but that'll be a next year thing.
Even better. Yeah, so people are using ZFS more and more and want to make sure to use it the best way possible. Okay, and our last question this week is from Steven about virtualization under FreeBSD. So he writes, "Hi Alan and Benedict. BSD Now has been my favorite show on the network since I started watching it, and I never miss an episode. I've been a long-time Linux user, with Slackware being my distro of choice for many years. A little over a year ago, I decided to embark on a little FreeBSD experiment and was immediately in love. I became a little more than just an experiment. It became a little bit more than just an experiment, and it now runs on multiple machines in his house, including a FreeNAS server, a vanilla FreeBSD server, and his pfSense router box. Ooh, wow, that's quite a deployment already. So his ultimate goal, however, was to use FreeBSD on his work machine. He works from home remotely, connecting to hospitals around the country via Citrix applications. For this, he has to use a Slackware host. You're running Windows VirtualBox VMs. With its excellent stability, FreeBSD seemed like the great solution for this task. However, he has found VirtualBox to not run well under FreeBSD. He knows that Beehive is another option for the work that he's doing, and he needs to have that to be mature and fully configured, or a fully featured GUI virtual machine manager from which he can spin up and manage VMs quickly. Is there any hope of this situation improving in the not-too-distant future?"
GUI for Beehive, I don't know. I know the TrueOS people are working on something, but I don't know what that's going to look like. VirtualBox generally isn't so bad. I wonder what particular problems you're having with it on FreeBSD. On 11.1, it should be quite stable. I don't know what problems you might be running into there.
Maybe running multiple VMs in parallel?
Even that. I don't know. On FreeBSD 12, there's also Zen available, and there are plenty of tools for that. I don't know about GUI tools, but there are definitely quite mature tooling for the Zen command line interface.
Yep. This might be something you can try out. He also writes, "At least in the interim, he has compiled and started using ZFS under Slackware on a 3 terabyte drive RAID Z array for his work machine. It has been working out great, but he would still prefer the FreeBSD way of doing things."
Yes, I definitely agree that FreeBSD is better. I don't know how often you need to recreate the Windows VM. Like, it's setting up a Windows VM in Beehive is not that bad, and once it's done, it's done. But If you constantly need to make different ones, then I can understand why you'd want better tooling for that. I don't know what the roadmap for that looks like. I wonder if the easy solution isn't to find out what problem you're having with VirtualBox and solve that.
Yeah, but it's a good example of people trying out new things and then immediately liking FreeBSD or any other BSD around, and then just, transplant their current work environment to the BSDs and finding it much better. And if we solve a couple of things that are still not working as supposed they should work, this might also be a good migration story. So if people have some ideas or suggestions how to make VirtualBox run better, or for a different GUI VirtualBox management tool or virtualization management tool in general, send us feedback and we will cover it in a future episode. So that's feedback@bsdnow.tv, where you can also send us questions, other comments, show topics and ideas, or stories you found on the internet or that we should mention in the future, and we'll make sure to cover it in a future episode. So thanks for watching. This is the end of our episode this week. And enjoy the winter as much as you can. And see you next week.
Oh, winter hasn't even... We had the first flurries last night. Winter hasn't even started
A few ones. Yeah, your winter is going to start, and it's going to be a bit more than...
December's the nicest part of winter.
Ooh. Okay.
But anyway, see everybody next week. Have a good week, and send us more email.